That night, I sat in my office with a glass of whiskey before bed. Just as I was about to take a sip, the young maid rushed in, her face pale. "Sir, don't drink that." Her voice cracked on the last word. I froze with the crystal glass still inches from my mouth. The amber liquid reflected the firelight from the wall behind me, trembling slightly in my hand. Outside the mansion windows, rain slid down the black glass in crooked lines. Somewhere upstairs, my wife was laughing softly on the phone. The maid, Elena, could barely breathe. Her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the silver tray she carried. She looked over her shoulder before whispering, "I saw Mr. Adrian put something in it." My younger brother. For a moment, the room became painfully quiet. No thunder, no clock, just the slow burn of whiskey fumes rising toward my face. I set the glass down carefully. "Who else knows?" I asked. Her eyes filled instantly. "Your wife." That hurt more than the poison. I dismissed her gently and locked the office door behind her. Then I sat alone in the leather chair, staring at the untouched drink, while 20 years of loyalty collapsed in silence around me. Adrian had been living in my guest house for 8 months after his gambling. Debts buried him alive. My wife, Claire, had begged me to help him. And I had. I paid his debts, gave him work, trusted him with access to my company accounts. I even defended him when my board warned me he was dangerous. But betrayal rarely arrives wearing a stranger's face. It comes dressed as family. It eats at your table. It waits for you to lower your guard. Unable to sleep, I opened the hidden camera feed connected to the basement security system. The old wine cellar had been converted into a private storage room months ago after Adrian moved in. I never checked the cameras anymore. That night I did. The screen flickered once before stabilizing, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Claire stood beside my brother near the basement workbench. Her hand rested against his chest. They weren't arguing. They weren't afraid. They were planning. On the table between them sat a small brown bottle. Watched Adrian pour drops into a glass while Claire asked one quiet question. "How long until it kills him?" My name is Victor Hale, and for most of my life, people confused my silence for weakness. I built Hale Logistics from a rented warehouse near the docks when I was 27 years old. Back then, I slept in my office beside unpaid invoices and lived on gas station coffee. By 49, I owned shipping contracts across 3 countries, a mansion that overlooked the lake, and enough money to make people pretend they respected me. But respect built on convenience is just another form of hunger. Claire entered my life 12 years earlier, when I was still rebuilding after my first business. Partner stole nearly everything from me. She was elegant, patient, and warm in ways I wasn't. I mistook her calm attention for love because exhausted. Men often confuse relief with devotion. Then there was Adrian, my younger brother, charming, reckless, the kind of man who could borrow money while insulting the person lending it. Our father adored him openly while treating me like a dependable machine. Adrian made mistakes. I cleaned them up. That pattern followed us into adulthood so naturally that nobody questioned it anymore. Even at family dinners, I noticed how people interrupted me mid-sentence but laughed at Adrian's empty stories like he was the center of gravity itself. I learned early that useful people are rarely loved loudly. They're expected, relied on, consumed quietly. And the dangerous part is, eventually you begin accepting that role yourself. After Adrian moved into the guest house, the atmosphere inside my home changed in small, poisonous ways. Not enough to confront, just enough to notice. Claire began defending him before anyone criticized him. If he missed meetings at the company, she'd smile faintly and say, "You know how creative people are with schedules." Adrian wasn't creative, he was irresponsible, but every excuse sounded softer in her voice. At dinner, they developed little habits that made me feel like a visitor in my own house. Shared glances across the table, half-finished jokes that stopped when I entered the room. Once, while pouring wine, I heard Claire laugh at something Adrian whispered. The moment she saw me watching, the laughter disappeared instantly. That silence stayed with me longer than the laugh itself. The staff noticed things too. Conversations stopped when I walked into rooms. My head groundskeeper avoided eye contact for days after catching Adrian leaving the main house near midnight. Nobody said anything directly. Wealth trains people to survive by pretending not to see. Then came the board meeting. Adrian arrived 40 minutes late wearing one of my suits, sat at the conference table, and openly contradicted me in front of senior partners. Claire, seated beside the window, never once defended me. She simply lowered her eyes and traced the rim of her coffee cup, while others exchanged uncomfortable glances. In that moment, I understood something chilling. Disrespect becomes dangerous when people grow confident there will be no consequences. I watched the basement footage 3 times before sunrise. Not because I doubted what I saw, because some part of me still wanted to believe there was an explanation that wouldn't destroy what remained of my family. But betrayal becomes undeniable in the smallest details. Claire never looked nervous. Adrian never hesitated. They moved with the comfort of people who had repeated the conversation before. At one point, my brother even smiled while tightening the cap on the bottle, as casually as a man closing a bottle of wine after dinner. That smile settled something inside me. By morning, I had already made 2 decisions. First, I poured the poisoned whiskey into a laboratory sample container from my office safe. Second, I stopped thinking like a husband and started thinking like the man who built a company by surviving predators. I said nothing at breakfast. Claire sat across from me wearing cream-colored silk, asking if I'd sleep better after the stress of recent board meetings. Adrian walked in 10 minutes later, acting exhausted, though his eyes briefly flicked toward the whiskey cabinet behind me, waiting, measuring. I almost admired the patience of it. That afternoon, I quietly contacted my attorney, my head of corporate security, and a private forensic analyst I'd trusted for years. No police, no emotional confrontation. Men like Adrian survive chaos. They drown in precision. Then came the final confirmation. The toxicology report arrived just after sunset. A lethal dose, slow-acting, difficult to trace in alcohol. I stared at the report for a long time before folding it neatly into my desk drawer. And for the first time in months, I felt completely calm. I spent the next 2 weeks pretending nothing had changed. That was the hardest part. Claire still kissed my cheek before social events. Adrian still wandered through my office like the house already belonged to him. I responded the same way I always had. Measured voice, steady expression, quiet patience. People underestimate how exhausting restraint can become when you already know the truth. But privately, I began dismantling their future piece by piece. Years earlier, after my former business partner betrayed me, I rewrote the structure of my company with obsessive precision. Every major asset required layered authorization. Every executive communication passed through archived servers, monitored by internal compliance software. Most people saw me as cautious. In reality, I had simply learned that trust without documentation is suicide. My legal counsel, Margaret Ellis, handled the first phase discreetly. Access privileges were adjusted. Financial movements were flagged. Adrian's temporary authority inside Hale. Logistics was reduced without announcement. He never noticed, because men like him rarely study details until the doors stop opening. Meanwhile, my security director recovered, deleted messages from the basement computer. Adrian believed he had erased hotel reservations, offshore account discussions, photos of Claire and Adrian together dating back nearly a year. The affair hurt. The attempted murder clarified everything else. So instead of reacting emotionally, I prepared consequences with the same discipline I once used to build my empire. Slowly, quietly, without leaving them room to escape. The collapse began on a Thursday evening during our annual company foundation dinner. Nearly 200 executives, investors, and political guests filled the ballroom overlooking the lake. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors while a string quartet played softly near the stage. Claire stood beside me in a silver gown, smiling gracefully for photographs. Adrian drank expensive scotch at the bar like a man, already celebrating an inheritance. Neither of them knew the board meeting had happened 3 hours earlier. Neither knew I had already signed the documents removing Adrian from all corporate involvement, or that Claire's access to every shared financial account had been frozen before sunset. I waited until dessert before stepping onto the stage. No anger, no dramatic speech. I simply thanked everyone for supporting Hale Logistics through the years. Then I nodded once toward the large projection screen behind me. The basement footage appeared instantly. Not all of it, just enough. Claire's face lost color first. Adrian turned slowly toward me, the glass still hanging loosely from his fingers. Around the ballroom, conversations died, one table at a time until the entire room fell silent except for the faint music still playing in the corner. Then came the toxicology report, then the recovered messages, then the security timestamps proving everything. No shouting followed. That was the strange part. People moved away from them naturally, like water pulling back from contamination. Adrian tried speaking once. Nobody listened, and Claire never looked at me again. By the following morning, the story had spread through every circle that once welcomed them warmly. Not because I spoke to the press. I didn't have to. People with influence survive by protecting proximity to power. And once the evidence became public inside that ballroom, Claire and Adrian became liabilities overnight. Invitations disappeared first. Then business calls stopped. Even longtime friends suddenly remembered unanswered instincts they had ignored for months. Adrian's creditors found him within days. Without access to my company, my attorneys, or my money, he looked smaller somehow, less charming. The confidence that once carried him through life vanished the moment consequences finally stayed attached to his actions. Last I heard, he was trying to sell watches and borrowed cars to cover legal expenses. Claire suffered differently. Reputation was the currency she valued most, and betrayal stains quietly but permanently in certain social circles. People still smiled at her in public, but there was hesitation behind it now. Curiosity, distance. Nobody fully trusts someone capable of poisoning the person who gave them everything. As for me, the strangest feeling wasn't anger, it was relief. Because the real damage betrayal causes isn't financial, it's psychological. It teaches you to question your own judgment, your own memories, your own worth. That's why people care about stories like this. Not for revenge itself, but for the moment someone finally stops accepting disrespect disguised as love. 6 months after the dinner, the house finally felt quiet again. Not empty, just honest. I renovated the basement first. The old wine cellar became a private library, with dark walnut shelves and tall windows facing the lake. I removed every hidden camera except one near the front gate. Not because I lived in fear now, but because experience teaches caution differently than paranoia. One imprisons you, the other prepares you. Elena, the maid who warned me, still works for me. I doubled her salary the week after everything happened and paid for her younger brother's university tuition without telling anyone. Loyalty deserves protection too often denied in this world. As for Hale Logistics, the company survived the scandal better than I expected. In fact, the board trusted me more afterward. People are strangely comforted by leaders who remain calm while their lives burn around them. But the biggest change wasn't financial or professional. It was personal. For years, I believed love meant endurance, sacrifice, silence. I thought being dependable required tolerating betrayal, as long as the family image remained intact. Now I understand something far simpler. Peace is expensive because it costs you the people who profit from your weakness. Some nights I still pour myself a glass of whiskey before bed. I sit beside the fire and watch the lake in silence, and I always leave the glass untouched for a moment first.